If you were to ask me about what the most overtaught thing in my years of high school was, I'd say everything having to do with slavery. If you were to ask me what the second most overtaught thing was, I'd say it was Freytag's pyramid. Though objectively there are likely things that were went over more, Freytag's pyramid stuck in my mind the most, albeit for all the wrong reasons. Everybody I knew hated that stupid diagram, and for good reason. It's so boring. It's used to interpret literature that's hundreds of years old and that no one understands anymore without a translator, and most of the time it's just wrong, or at least in most of the contexts that it was used for me. For those who are out of the loop, you may be asking what in the hell Freytag's pyramid is. In short, it's a tool that literary analyzers use in order to put into categories the different aspects of a narrative. It begins with exposition, then transitions with an inciting action, then has the rising action, followed by the climax, before going into its falling action, and then finishing it out with a resolution. Pretty basic stuff. When discussing Shakespearean plays, Freytag's pyramid comes up a lot, as most plays follow it quite well. With the 5-act structure, it makes things easy to put entire acts into certain pockets of categorization. Act 1 is exposition/inciting incident, Act 2 is rising action, Act 3 is climax, Act 4 is falling action, and Act 5 is the resolution. It fits rather well most of the time. However, where Freytag's pyramid falls apart is when analyzing any form of modern storytelling, and in order to find out why, we need to dissect the concept down to its barest form. To prove my point, I'll be mostly focusing on the climax aspect of the diagram. A climax is defined as, among other things, the most intense, exciting, or important point of something, a culmination or apex. And from there, we're already seeing problems. In Freytag's pyramid, the climax never served the purpose of a culmination or as the point of highest tension, it was a turning point in the drama. Take Othello, where the climax in Act 3 is when the titular character fully believes Iago's lies and begins to fall into madness because of it. So, with just 13 words of definition, we've already destroyed the integrity of Freytag's pyramid when observing it through modern storytelling. Now, this much may seem obvious to most, but ironically, to those responsible for teaching young people about dramatic structure and literary analysis, the public education system, this concept continues to escape them. Instead, they've tried time after time to try and twist and mangle modern works of fiction to fit into Freytag's pyramid. While I'm unable to name a specific example on account of me blocking the bad books that I had to read out of my mind, I do remember being increasingly frustrated with each attempt that they made. So what can be done? Well, a couple things. First, we could all try to stop compartmentalizing narrative. The concept of a narrative itself is so poorly defined and malleable that it hardly seems worth it to try and fit each and every one into some arbitrary category. Second, we can make up another way to identify dramatic structure. I propose a revised Freytag's pyramid. Before I explain it, here are some ground rules. No category that happens in this diagram is comprised of only one event. These are more umbrella terms for general points in a given story. Second, if you don't like it, that's fine by me. If you can come up with something better, please share it. Alright, everyone ready? Here we go. So the first part stays the same. Exposition is exposition, it's needed and it's not going away. This includes character setup, world building, etc. Once that's done, we introduce the catastrophe. This takes the place of the inciting incident. A catastrophe has been described as a sudden change from good to bad. For an example, this is when everything goes wrong and the bad guys attack the airship in The Avengers. After this is the rising action, like normal. This can have peaks and valleys depending on how many forks in the road the characters come across in the story, though none of these smaller peaks would ever constitute an actual climax. For example, the detour that the crew of the Millennium Falcon take to the Death Star in the first Star Wars movie. That would be part of the rising action, with a smaller peak occurring where the crew have to escape and Ben Kenobi gets 86th. Next, we have something that can be swapped with the one after it, the eucatastrophe. This term was first coined by renowned linguist and author J.R.R. Tolkien. The opposite of a catastrophe, this is a sudden change from bad to good. Followed by that, or perhaps preceded by it, is the climax. This is the big moment, where dramatic tension is highest. This is where the conflict of the narrative gets resolved. I said that these two could be swapped, but that will take a bit of explaining. Instead of explaining, however, here are some examples instead. Take the above-mentioned Avengers. The eucatastrophe is the moment when the Hulk bashes in that big alien's face and they all stand triumphant against the threat in that really hype shot where the camera circles around them. Nothing is resolved, but we, as the audience, feel that the situation has managed to turn itself around. The climax, then, is the entirety of the Avengers' fight against the aliens that threaten the city, and ends when the aliens get nuked. On the flip side, take The Lord of the Rings, specifically The Return of the King. The climax of the film is when Aragorn and the rest of the Fellowship distract Sauron so that Frodo and Sam can take the ring to Mount Doom, and it also includes the brief scuffle between Frodo and Gollum over possession of the ring, and ends when Gollum and the ring fall down and Frodo is saved by Sam. The eucatastrophe, then, are the shots on the ring finally melting away, its evil influence vanishing, and the tower that held Sauron's eye exploding in a massive burst. It's a sudden change from bad to good. Either way, it still fits relatively nicely with most modern stories, but we're not done yet. After those two, whichever order you may put them in, is the denouement. Gone are the falling action and the resolutions, as we've already established the resolution happened at the end of the climax. Thus, the falling action is non-existent in the first place. The denouement is described as what happened and how the characters think or feel about it. Using this definition as a backbone, the denouement would be, for example, in The Lord of the Rings again, when the hobbits return to the Shire after destroying the ring and realize that they can't just go back to the way they were after what had happened to them, which ultimately leads to Frodo leaving for the Undying Lands, along with all the other 50 endings for the characters that happen. On a real quick side note, the catastrophe and eucatastrophe could conceivably be switched as well, depending on the type of story that's trying to be told. For example, in Bruce Almighty, the eucatastrophe happens before the rising action when he attains the powers of God, and then the rising action happens, and then the catastrophe happens when he realizes what a jerk he was about the whole thing, which is followed by the climax of how he tries to fix everything he's done. So, what's the point of all this ranting and raving? Well, I'm just kinda sick of Freytag's pyramid, to be honest. It invades far too much of storytelling in my opinion, and that's not to say there aren't other forms of dramatic analysis. One such form is Kisho Tenketsu from Japanese, Chinese, and Korean literature. However, my point isn't that these other methods don't exist, it's that they aren't taught. In most modern English literature classes, Freytag is absolute, when really the titular pyramid for which the man was named after was only a theory in the first place. It was designed because this guy saw trends within the dramatic structure of stage plays, not as absolute fact of the correct way to tell a compelling story. Even if Freytag doesn't go away, I want to at least give a way to give counter-arguments and to offer an alternate method of discussing dramatic structure for more modern literature pieces. I suppose time will tell if I've done that. Why don't you all tell me what you think? Should I have explained it better? Is the form too loose or fit too few examples? Let me know.